Welcome to the podcast. This episode, as the previous episodes, we've talked about the war, but from different perspectives. Now, to understand this war, you have to understand it from the inside, and that's what we've attempted to do in the last few episodes. Today, we want to understand the President of the United States from the inside, specifically from the side of the Republican Party. And some may ask, which part of the Republican Party, the MAGA wing or the traditionalists? Well, that's why we have today on our show Matthew Bartlett. Matthew is a strategic communicator, a strategist who is the principal and co-founder of Darby Field Advisory. He previously worked as a Trump-era, Trump 1 in his first term, political appointee at the State Department, where he was the liaison between Congress and the State Department for PEPFAR. He is an expert on everything Republican and New Hampshire. And I don't think you can find anyone more knowledgeable today in the inner workings of the Republican Party, this White House, as someone who served in the previous Trump administration and understand strategic communications inside the Republican Party, both wings of the Republican Party, or multiple wings maybe of the party, than Matthew Bartlett. Now, a word on PEPFAR. I'm going to mention PEPFAR at the end of this podcast, and it's an important thing because I know that Matthew feels very close to it, and I do as well. It is a global program that has helped millions across the world. PEPFAR is the United States President's Emergency Plan for AIDS and Relief. It is a program that has invested over $110 billion into global HIV/AIDS response and has saved over 26 million lives to date. It has a presence and effect in more than 50 countries globally. And this is a subject that is close to Matthew's heart. Matthew's, in full disclosure, an old friend that I've known from my DC days, and I wanted to bring him here to give us a better understanding of the war, the Republican Party, U.S. politics, from inside strategic communication. Matthew, thank you for doing the podcast.
Nawaf, my friend, good to see you. And we started this friendship many years ago over cigars and burgers. And now we are on opposite sides of the world with a war going on. So it's good to join you, but I look forward to those better days ahead again.
Well, thank you very much for doing this. You mentioned the war. Could you tell me from Washington where you are, and I explained in the monologue who you are and your whole history in U.S. politics. What does the war look like from where you sit?
I think there's two dimensions to this right now, and this may be a tale of two wars in some ways. There is the military operation, which is much more germane to a foreign policy conversation with again, many questions at hand there. And then, of course, there is the political aspects of this war domestically here in a divided nation. And so sometimes there's a correlation, even a causation between the two. But there's also a disconnect right now. So it's mixed. And this came on relatively quick. We are weeks into it, and we certainly don't know how long this will last.
Well, you're right. I mean, this is now, we're recording this as we enter week 4 of the war. And one of the kind of messages that was sent from the Trump administration was regime change, supporting the uprising. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the Secretary of War mentioned the projection of power. And let me go with the idea of projection of power. Iran seems to be in a more emboldened posture as we enter week 4. Yes, a lot of the military objectives, as we see in the news, are being met. But, compared to before the war, the Straits of Hormuz, are closed or partially closed. We here in the GCC as well, where I'm at right now, for instance, we are on the receiving end of ballistic missiles and projectiles definitely on a daily basis, sometimes multiple times a day. Is that being felt in Washington, that this is really maybe getting worse before it's getting better? Or how do you see the kinetic part moving and supporting, the political message?
Yeah, great questions, and maybe not some great answers or clear answers, I will say. First and foremost, yes, Qatar, the region are under attack. So our thoughts, our prayers, our love go out to you, go out to the civilians. And, right now, Qatar has just been such an ally, such a leader in the world. And we are deeply appreciative and stand with you, Qatar strong and Qatar tough. And we've seen just some attacks that are uncalled for, wildly out of bounds from Iran. And we hope that it only strengthens our partnership and our will moving forward. Yeah, this is war. It's not good. It is unpopular. It is not pretty, but the notion is that, we would rather be, on our side than on the side of the Iranians. And that, yes, they are acting out. And we hope that that is a diminished threat, internally, externally, and more importantly, in the future. Listen, Americans, pay attention to foreign policy, but they also pay attention to their own futures and family and friends, just like anyone does, be it in the region or even in Iran. So yeah, there are constraints, and some of that is military members overseas. Some of that is the economic pain that we are experiencing from the global economy, from the price of oil. And it's mixed. It's mixed. It's mixed.
So you mentioned the global economy and the price of oil and the pain we're all feeling to different degrees, obviously. Now, Georgia, just before we started recording this, the state of Georgia, I believe, well, tell me, did Georgia just suspend the taxes on fuel? I believe that's the case. Now, assuming that's the case, because it's breaking news as we're recording this. Now, obviously, suspending fuel taxes, gas price taxes in the state of Georgia will alleviate some of the trouble for the folks in that state. Maybe other states follow suit. But how will that affect, state incomes? Because less taxes may help in the short term, but it will affect how can they spend their own money. So that kind of domino effect of the oil prices. And before I let you answer that, as we sit today, West Texas is hovering close to 100. Brent is just, stuck over $100 a barrel. Reuters had a poll today, 63% of Americans disapprove of Trump's handling of the cost of living in the U.S., according to those polled by Reuters today. So all in all, with all these issues, the idea of that is being projected by some in Washington that that's a problem over there, it's not a problem over here. We've got our own oil and gas. The gas pumps, are getting more expensive, or to go to by Americans. How do you see that, today and in the coming days and weeks?
Yeah, I mean, again, affordability has always been the most potent political issue of the day here in America. Massive issue in the 2024 election that brought Trump and Republicans back to power. Still an issue that plagues Republicans who are in power. Now, of course, throw on the price of oil, the price of gasoline escalating, a political, economic pressure point that all Americans struggle with. Again, this is a notion of just reality of war, of the situation with Iran. As you said, taxes, states that's on the margins. None of this will actually be remedied until the price of oil comes down, a global commodity. And there's not much, you can do until you get those straits open here. And even if and when that does happen, again, there's still economic constraints. So this is not helpful in any way. Nobody thinks war is popular, and nobody thinks war helps the economy or the American family.
Well, going back to the administration, now this is an election year. The midterms are, I believe in 6 months we're going to have the primaries, and in November we're going to have the midterms. Obviously, you're watching that very closely, and we're going to talk more about that in a minute. But for the administration itself, looking at issues with Israel, right now, the view of the war is kind of, static. It's neither here nor there in America, if my reading is correct, at least, as we sit here entering in week 4. But what's happening to the base, whether it's MAGA, whether it's traditional Republicans, what's going over there when it comes to the war? We see some fraction, obviously, in the news and the media. Is that real, and how real is it?
Yes and no. Listen, this has been a president that, campaigned on America first. No more endless wars. And we went from America first to America strikes first in Iran very, very quickly. There is some conversations around the base, if you will, the MAGA base. A lot of the MAGA influencers, you're thinking about your Tucker Carlsons, your Megyn Kellys, questioning this. But if you look at the polling, the media loves to obsess on, the MAGA base fracturing. But the polling suggests that MAGA and Republicans continue to be with the president, even on this war. And that it is, not just Democrats, but the independents who are peeling away. So in many ways, this war is a litmus test on what you think of President Trump. And if you like President Trump, you're probably still with him. And if you weren't a fan of him, you probably question this even more. So we'll see if that maintains. I would argue The longer this goes on, the greater and growing concerns and the potential for a schism within the party. We'll see what happens if this is wrapped up in a few weeks or if this is months or longer. I think, again, questions will only grow, and that's a threat to a winning coalition.
But even MAGA, Matthew, how much could they take when it comes to, I mean, rising gas prices doesn't affect only the filling your car at the gas pump. It affects transportation of food. There comes a point where farmers, middle America, folks that voted for Trump will feel the pain even before, the coastal Republicans, if we will. Those are the folks that President Trump, relied on when he won the last election. Don't you think that it'll get a point where it's like, okay, this is not a one issue president. Either he gets off this issue of, forever, what it seems like forever wars again with Iran, or we may look for somewhere else or just sit this one out. I mean, this is even more dangerous, not voting Democrats or someone else, just not voting Republican.
Yes and no. I think you are correct. The longer this goes on, the economic pain is a political problem. Although I would argue that we have enough political problems even without this. But I think there's also a notion of a security concerns, of the legitimacy around our actions, of Iran being a nefarious regime that has not just threatened their own people, not just threatened the region, not just threatened America, but pose a true security concern in the world. And that now we are addressing it. I'm not sure if it would be my call. I'm not sure that this is wrong, but we're in it right now. And how do we remedy it? How do we end this and make the world a safer place? And that peace leads to greater prosperity. So I think there's a mix of that in there. But like you said, there's also political realities of Democrats are going to win nonetheless. And hey, Democrats, I think most Democrats say, yeah, Iran is a threat. Well, then what's your answer? Just let it fester. So this is a geopolitical, foreign policy issue that has legitimacy and maybe, not a lot of good options here.
Yeah, I mean, look, I agree. I mean, Iran, I've many times on public media, I just, on the BBC the other day, I was asked this question and I said, look, Iran is committing terrorism and war crimes. There's no doubt about that. But an off-ramp, that, the word off-ramp, we hear that a lot. Do you see the administration right now seeking an off-ramp or just laser focused on the war?
Hard to say. It seems as if the notion is after rounds of or even years of diplomatic talks and deals and continued horrific behavior by the evil regime, that the notion is, okay, we'd like to talk. No more nuclear program, no more ballistic program, and no more proxies of Hamas and Hezbollah. And they came back and said, well, we're not going to talk about that. In fact, we're going to continue to enrich at different levels. That was an interesting counterproposal. If they thought they had leverage, our answer was, understood, thank you very much. And we're going to go out and we're going to hit your nuclear program, your ballistics, your drones, and go after your proxies. So yeah, we will ensure that you are not a threat to us, to your neighbors, and we will do that by force because we feel as if you've chosen that. So I think there's a notion of taking this campaign to degrade. They don't have unlimited missiles. They don't have unlimited nuclear. And that if they want to scream death to America, that it's going to be words alone and that they are not going to have the capabilities to cause the damage that they have done. Whether or not that leads to regime change, that might be up to the people. Everyone talks about an off-ramp. Boy, my preferred off-ramp would be the people of Iran or the leaders of Iran say, you know what? Boy, we look at Qatar, we look at other places in the region. They are diversifying, they're investing in their people, in their future. And yet Iran continues to try to invest in nuclear bombs and ballistic missiles and bad behavior. I hope that the off-ramp is that they choose a better pathway forward for their own people, for their own future, choose to join the global economy, the global community, because peace is far better for business than war. And so I'd like to see that option. If not, we'll see, how the president, again, it seems to negate the threat and continue to monitor.
So absolutely, I agree with you. But it comes to when we look at now, in your work in State Department, and we'll get to that in a bit. But from your experience from the State Department, diplomacy obviously should be, as I believe it, the end state when we sit down and negotiate. How we resolve this. You can't resolve it through war. The wars could be a tool, but the end state should be through diplomacy, and hopefully we get there fast. At least thinking about the people in Iran and everywhere. But from a selfish perspective, I'm thinking about, my family, my country, the region. We need to end this because we're on the receiving end. So talking about diplomacy, there's been a lot in the news lately about, Israel kind of forcing the administration's hand into war. NBC News had a poll a couple of days ago where it wasn't, looking good for definitely, Democrats, but surprisingly, not even for Republicans wasn't looking good. Would that be an indication that Americans, even in the Republican Party, are now looking at Israel thinking, why are we, in this war because Benjamin Netanyahu, basically, I don't think even the Israeli people, the civilians want this war. But the, Netanyahu government right now is kind of pushing for this war. Is that sentiment reflected in the NBC News poll accurate? And could it even get worse?
Maybe in some ways. Let's remember that it was Trump that originally forced Bibi to take the ceasefire deal with Hamas in Gaza. So this notion of leverage or leading into war, I always question. I do think the administration originally had some messy messaging around this of they were going to hit Israel, then hit us, so we hit. But again, I think ultimately the notion is, hey, Iran, stop making nuclear weapons and stop this behavior. Like, we can talk about Israel, we can talk about the U.S. I think the key here is solving the problem, not looking at the other ways. The president is always open to talking to people, always open, a preferred notion of diplomacy. But again, dealing with Iran has been very difficult. And the question is, what do you do there? And I'm not sure. I've heard a lot of good ideas. We can talk about, why this happened, how this started. But I think it also comes down to a question of, what do you do with Iran? And again, I don't think this was an imminent threat. I think this was a festering threat. And I don't think they're going to wait till it became an imminent threat. They seem adamant on pursuing nuclear weapons, ballistic missiles. Again, I wish after the Obama deal that they had chosen different behavior, joined the global economy. Instead, they were emboldened on a global stage, destabilizing the region. So that's a very tough call as president. What do you do? And again, we'll see how it plays. But so much of this is tied up, not only just in America or in Iran, is my answer to that.
So just going back to that for a second, as I mentioned earlier, you were a Trump political appointee to the State Department. You handled a very important portfolio, which we'll get to in a minute. But just from, you as a Republican strategist, you speak to a lot of Republicans. A lot of people are speaking to you now that we're in an election year, specifically are looking to every detail. When Secretary Rubio made that statement, which basically sounded to me and many others like, well, Israel told us they will attack, so we had to go along, kind of a thing. And I'm paraphrasing here.
We stood and waited for that attack to come first. Before we hit them, we would suffer much higher casualties. And so the president made the very wise decision. We knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that that would precipitate an attack against American forces. And we knew that if we didn't preemptively go after them before they launched those attacks, we would suffer higher casualties and perhaps even higher those killed. And then we would all be here answering questions about why we knew that and didn't act.
Did you just put your face in your hand and go, guys, that's not the way to project the message?
Listen, I think that was, horrible leading message. And I'm not sure that this war has been very well articulated in general, or certainly to the American public. Again, I'm just trying to be honest here. This was not an imminent issue, but this was a long, festering issue where we tried diplomacy. And again, it seems as if, my take is Iran really miscalculated. Not sure what they were thinking. Wish they had chosen better. And this is an evil regime that has killed their own people, killed Americans for decades now. We tried talking. They sent back their counter proposal. I wasn't shocked when our proposal, when we said enough's enough. We gave you two options here, no more nuclear, and they chose port. Now we're seeing the reactions. So the initial explanation of this is why, because we thought they were going to attack immediately. I don't think that's ever been the case. Regardless, we're in it now. Militarily speaking, we have decimated air superiority, their Navy. They don't have infinite ways to react. Their leadership it's interesting. There are questions to be asked. I remain skeptical, but also realistic that this is, the last gasp of a regime here that has brutally murdered their own people here. And it's not easy, but it's also not going poorly.
Okay.
So far.
Obviously, well, yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said.
Maybe.
Well, let's hope so, because again, as I mentioned, they seem the tempo of the attacks over here, and you mentioned, they've killed Americans and others. I mean, in this war, in the past 3, now entering the week 4, they've killed, citizens of the GCC. So they've killed our own citizens and obviously attacked and targeted civilian infrastructure, locations, hotels, just very airports, just attacking civilian locations. If it wasn't for, our own armed forces, in my case, the Qatari armed forces, the men and women who, actually defended the nation, could have been much worse. But coming back to diplomacy and Qatar and the GCC, there's this narrative, and we've talked about it for years in the past, that, anti-Qatar narrative. And that's the big elephant in the room. And unfortunately, even today, I've heard on someone who you and I both know on their podcast. I'm going to mention who they are because I believe they follow me, so they may see this and know this. But they've mentioned things like, Qatar supporting terrorism, which we know isn't the case. A lot of folks cite, well, you support Hamas or you support the Taliban. And what they forget to mention is, well, Qatar intervened in mediating between Taliban and the U.S. because the U.S. asked. It's intervened to mediate between Hamas and Israel and host Hamas in Qatar because multiple U.S. and Israeli government asked repeatedly. And, that kind of goes away. But doesn't that also point to a greater problem? Why would any nation, whether in the Gulf or now we see the friction in Europe, stand up and take one for the team, as it were, and help the U.S. if what they receive is that kind of attack in the media? That's kind of
listen, I hear you very much so, and I take the same offense when I hear that. I wish the world, was absent stupid people saying stupid things. Okay, that's not the case. We've heard anti-U.S., anti-Western, anti-Israel, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, anti-Qatar. No shortage of dumb stuff being said now and in the past and probably in the future. But let's also remember how the wise people, how the peacemakers, and how the adults in the room are approaching this. And it is an entirely new, time in the region, time in the world. One of the weird things where a president who started his campaign on a Muslim ban goes first trip, goes to the region. And what does he say about Qatar? Boy, we should focus in on that. What a great, strong ally they have been. His relationship with the emir, his affinity for the people, how they are not just regional, but global players in peace, in prosperity. Let's focus on that. Let's double down on that. That to me is very exciting. You saw him tweeting last night. We've seen security agreements. We hope that leads to greater prosperity. And I would argue at no time, at least in my lifetime, have I seen Qatar on the global stage, like you just said, as peacemakers, as players in the community. So we can focus on a lot of stupid things that a lot of stupid people say. Never mind the nonsense. Let's carry on in the right way and have this friendship recognized and strengthened, because boy, now is the time in the middle of a war where we see our interests and our allies, to be stronger. So nothing's easy, but let's focus in on what's right and keep what's right going in the right direction.
I share that, and I hope that message percolates amongst.
You don't even share it, you demonstrate it, and we love that and we appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, now coming to a favorite topic of yours, which is domestic policies. Now we're looking here in the Middle East, obviously with curiosity on everything going on in the U.S., especially now with the war going on. Everyone here is trying to gauge every little thing happening in America. Now, what was on the news lately was Joe Kent resigning as the head of the NCC, and I believe the FBI is reportedly, we don't know that for sure, but there were reports that they're starting an investigation.
Yeah.
You may have a personal reflection on that or a view. How does that affect the administration right now? And is that affecting the view of, the war itself? This is more domestic policy, but the basis of Joe Kent's resignation was the war.
No, listen, it is eyebrow raising, right? A Senate confirmed appointee just resigning because of this. I don't want to diminish that. That's a very big thing. But I also just want to acknowledge this guy's a weird duck. Okay. has said some weird things in the past, had some weird ideas, has had great service to our nation. I would argue this guy should never have been there in the first place. A bit on the crazy side. And what do crazy people do? Crazy things. And it seems as if, Tulsi Gabbard, Joe Kent, these people came from kind of a weird wing of the party and they got in place and then they were immediately iced out. Again, I would argue that they're probably not the best national security professionals. Doesn't even sound like Tulsi Gabbard is involved in national security issues right now, maybe in some fringe issues. So we should recognize it, but recognize it also for what it is. Again, the bigger issue is not Joe Kent. Joe Kent will not be talked about in the future. How this war in Iran goes will be talked about in the future. And I think that's going to be the main thing. If things continue to go on for a longer period of time or go wrong, that's going to be the issue, not necessarily Joe Kent.
So do you think Tulsi will be next?
She was just on the Hill this week. It seems as if she's maintaining her relationship with the president, almost saying, this wasn't my call, but I served the president, which, might be the case or might be reality and might be how government works. If she wanted to go, I think they would have had her, she would have left. If they wanted her to go, they would have booted her out. Sounds like she's going to stay, but doesn't sound like she's calling the shots either in terms of the national security aspects. And maybe that's a good thing.
So you're a famous son of New Hampshire, favorite son of Nashua, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. We're going to get you up there one of these days.
I really should, because the first time I came in contact with anyone from New Hampshire is when I met Senator Jean Shaheen in her office and saw, Live Free or Die, which I was in a meeting there and I stole it immediately and I used it in my previous job as Director of Communication for Defense. And you saw the image. We'll put it up for the viewers who are viewing this.
Yeah, baby.
As Live Free or Die. She's retiring. She's not running for office. This coming election, Senator Sununu, he wants his seat back, obviously. How do you see that, especially with Pappas? I saw Chris Pappas' number. Again, we're 6 months away from primaries. He has, I think, 3 times the amount of money in his coffers. And most of the early polls, extremely early polls, show him slightly ahead. A lot of numbers, like 15%, 12 to 15% are not taking part, are unsure. How do you see this going?
I love that this brilliant foreign policy mind, sitting a world away in the middle of a war, has just an absolute pulse on the state of New Hampshire. Yeah, you pretty much, you got it there. The last time New Hampshire sent a Republican to the Senate was in 2010. It's the person who I worked for, Senator Kelly Ayotte. You just mentioned Jean Shaheen, a legendary Democrat. I worked for the Republican senator. It's going to be a challenging mid-year for Republicans all around. And I'm not sure New Hampshire will be in play, even though I love Senator Sununu. Still think that he's, of I believe, Lebanese descent. But then also, like you mentioned, Chris Pappas is of Greek descent, as have I. So 2 good people. If you win in a purple state, not fully red, not fully blue, regardless of who that person is, Republican or Democrat, they tend to be better politicians because they've heard from the other side. They've had to listen and acknowledge that. So I think we'll have a fine senator from New Hampshire, no matter what happens, even though you might be right.
Do you think that, though, Senator Sununu will have a more difficult time? In New Hampshire, I think gas is up almost $1 compared to last month. Going back to the discussion we had a few minutes ago, he's got a difficult road ahead anyway. Do you think he has a chance, though?
Yes, we are a competitive state, right? Full stop. So every race, you can win or lose by 1 vote. But, you're going back to like the nature of New Hampshire. We are Republicans at home, cranky Yankees. Keep out of my bedroom, keep out of my wallet, let me live free or die and live the life I so choose. And that is still our posture. But we are not this, Trumpian style of Republican politics. Alabama might play better than New Hampshire. We have strains of it, but overall, it seems as if, as we have been for a decade now, we're Democrat in DC and Republican at home. I think that will probably continue on. Well,
that will have, I'm sure you would agree, an effect, obviously, on the makeup of the Senate, come the midterms for this administration's calculus about, how they move forward, and the Democrats' kind of calculus on also grabbing, is it 6 seats, I believe, that are up?
the U.S. Senate, 100 senators, they have 6-year terms. So a third of the Senate is every 2 years, right? And so I think there'll probably be something close to 30 Senate seats, I'm guessing. But only 7 are competitive, right? The other ones are safe Republican, safe Democrat. Only 7 swing states here. Now the map could shrink or expand, but yeah, you're right.
Well, the last question I have is something I know is very near and dear to you and very close, and it's just absolutely amazing work you did. It's something everyone would agree with, which is your work at the State Department with PEPFAR. This year, and I explained in the monologue what PEPFAR is, but this year's budget for PEPFAR is at $4.5 billion, which is better than what the administration initially said it would be, which is around $2.9 billion. But it's down from the 24 budget of $7.1 billion. How do you see that affecting the PEPFAR and other projects that State Department, when USAID and all of that did in the past? Someone who worked so close, especially bridging the gap between the executive and the legislative when it came to this important matter.
Boy, again, remarkable point, and thank you for making it. Yeah, listen, that is a program that's kind of been the North Star in my life, brought me to DC, in my political work. And we're 20 years in, something like 26 million people around the world have been saved by cheap HIV/AIDS drugs, in part by the U.S. taxpayer. We're now at a point where medical miracles have happened, where it's even cheaper, and you have shots where you don't even get HIV/AIDS. I think there's a focus in on working with other countries. There's sustainability, transferring some of these programs to countries that can now pay for them. We certainly don't want to just cut the program off. That would be horrible. As you said, we've had some damage, namely through Elon Musk and Doge. We're getting things back on track. Marco Rubio has been one of the greatest champions of this. And I think it reflects America. We just talked about war in Iran and our world, our peoples have been through so much, of war and we've seen the evils that exist. And it's really, really important to be united against those and to call them out. It's equally as important to show the world what you are for as well, for saving lives, for freedom, for, medications. That is just incredibly important, not just now and in the history books, but again, for changing the lives and to showing the ideals, the best of America. So we'll always have a budget fight. Hopefully we'll maintain that bipartisan support, Republicans and Democrats coming together, and hopefully one day work towards putting PEPFAR out of business, because there is no HIV/AIDS, because we can actually do that in today's world. So the fight goes on. I'm proud to say we'll always be a part of it. Thank you for recognizing it. We have the horrors of war and the horrors of AIDS, and hopefully, we work to better days so that we don't have them in the future. We make it to the other side of that rainbow.
Well, Matthew, PEPFAR is a program that is extremely valuable, and I always try to end at a hopeful note. And I think nothing says hope like helping families and children and victims of this devastating disease globally, like what you did and what your colleagues continue to do with PEPFAR at the State Department. I think this is a very good thing, and hopefully, in that same spirit, we could spread more peace and love in the world and end this war over here. Matthew Bartlett, thank you very much for joining us, and you made me very jealous. I'm going to go smoke a cigar and hopefully see you soon in DC, brother.
It is an honor to be on with you, an honor to call you a friend, and again, look forward to being in person. But again, thank you. The country of Qatar, we are so every night and every day checking on what is happening there, and just amazing to see the resiliency of Qatar right now, and in the future. So again, we're going to make it through together. All the best. See you soon.